An important reason why Africa should be studied and appreciated is because human civilizations originated on the continent. The first human-like creatures found on Earth were known as hominids. These were the first creatures to walk on two legs, and they were more closely related to primates. These creatures were rampant around 5 to 10 million years ago. Then around 2.5 million years ago, the Homo habilis began to emerge. They were the first tool-making hominids that started to evolve. During the glacial periods of 1.6 to 1.8 million years ago, the Homo erectus finally came into being. This was extremely influential for the development of mankind in Africa, because now there was an upright walking being roaming around. Since these creatures now had the ability to roam, it is no surprise that their descendants, soon known as Homo heidelbergensis, would begin to migrate to new parts of the world, such as Asia and Europe. Eventually, nearly 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens finally emerged, and the human, as is thought of today, was introduced to Earth. Another important aspect of African history is the agricultural revolution. Beginning around 5000 BCE, the climate on the African continent began to change. Because of this change, more settlements along the Nile River became possible. This affected migration patterns as well as state and social development. It was no longer common for people to be on their own and rely solely on their hunting and gathering skills. Organized societies and communities' efforts were now a part of life. Because of this change in settlements, leaders were now necessary because an organized cultivation system was prevalent. The change in becoming a more uniform society led Africa to eventually transition into a global power. This makes it an important continent to study because of its influence on the world. From 500 BCE to 500 CE, Africa went through another important change known as the Iron Revolution. Since iron is such a durable substance, it was able to be used for much longer-lasting tools such as farming mechanisms and weapons of war. Since Africans now had access to superior weapons, they were able to expand throughout the continent, subduing natural and political obstacles. This led to political leaders' ability to develop a kingdom based on production and development. This is important because iron agricultural tools made Africa a more stable environment within the continent, while iron weaponry made Africa more of a global power.
By the 16th century, the Atlantic slave trade began, which led to increased continental warfare and a severe economic downturn throughout Africa. African slaves began as captives of war throughout the continent because there was such a high number that were abducted, but there were too many within the country of Africa. This is why the slave trade began to expand to other countries. Since the plantations growing cotton and tobacco were constantly expanding in the Americas, that meant that the demand for slaves in America was growing. This had a large negative impact on the distribution of population in the country of Africa. According to Shillington's History of Africa, whatever its effect in terms of depopulating or distorting the development of the continent, the greatest evil of the transatlantic slave trade and the people was the extent of human suffering involved. Because history has been proven to repeat itself, that makes studying the transatlantic slave trade crucial so that these horrors do not happen again in the future. The distribution of Africans across the world led to the culture of Africa spreading as well. The transatlantic slave trade brought African people to the Americas, and with the people came their practices and traditions. However, they were focused to adapt their traditions to the white culture. By the end of slavery, African Americans had a blended type of music that turned into the true folk music known today. One example of how music was important to the continent can be observed in the study of ancient Egypt. In the ancient times of Egypt, the African people of the Nile River Valley led the world in musical development, and that trend still continues today. Egypt was considered a high society due to their musical influence in their culture. Music and oral traditions are proven to be a crucial aspect of passing down history and culture from generation to generation. Oral tradition greatly enhances literacy, and many Africans define Africa by oral modes of expression and communication. Africans learn music directly from the creators by the means of performances in order to understand, describe, and reproduce the music from memory. Griots, or traditionalists who preserve the past through song and verse, were relied upon to spread the history of their people. The history of African music and chants is worth studying because it not only helps spread global awareness, but without them we would have significantly less knowledge of the continent of Africa.
We should study Africa because Africa offers broad diversity to the world. It is the second largest continent that is filled with variations in the culture, traditions, beliefs, religions, language groups, social practices, and political practices. Africa offers seven different language groups, including Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, Cohesion, Niger-Congo, Creole, Austronesian, and Indo-European, and 5 different religions, including Islam, Christianity, indigenous religions, Hinduism, and Judaism. There were also many different ways in which the African states formed, but despite these different languages, religions, beliefs, and different ways that the African states formed, they influence one another's social practices and political ways of ruling. Many African states ruled based on kinship and divine power, believing that rulers are the embodied forms of gods. All of these things make Africa who they are. Because Africa is so diverse, it plays a major role in the study of anthropology, and Bates, Mudimbi, and Obar go so far as to say that this study of practices in different regions of the world would not exist without Africa's rich diversity.
By not understanding all of the things that make Africa the continent that it is, people tend to develop stereotypes because they do not know all the facts, and our minds try to fill these gaps with information that may not be true. Americans especially have misconstrued images of Africa based on inaccurate or fragmented exposure we get to Africa, believing that we, as Americans, are more developed than Africans are. People have developed crazy beliefs that Africans are wild people who live in savage tribes and who are not nearly as smart as Americans are. All of these beliefs stem from the little knowledge that we actually have about Africa. The media is a main contributor to this problem. TV shows like George of the Jungle and movies like Tarzan the Ape Man paint out Africa to be a wild jungle that only has savage people that live there. The news also does not portray Africa as it should be, by only showing the terrible things that happen there, making viewers believe that Africa is a poor country that needs our help. But if we studied Africa, we would find out that Africa is a very well-developed country. They are educated people who live in cities, work, and have strong ties with their families. They also have a rich history and culture. Studying Africa dispels myths of a savage Africa, so we can truly understand the large impact that Africa has on the world.